Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24, and I'm here to take you through maybe the strongest team match of the whole year 2018. I am talking about the clash between China and Russia in the World Team Championships that are currently going on in Astana. Now, the World Team Championship somehow doesn't get as much exposure as the Chess Olympiad, or to me it feels like, this could be wrong, even the European Team Championship. Some teams like the USA don't send their strongest lineups, and some teams like France, I believe, don't go there at all. So it's an event that's not getting that much PR, but Russia and China are taking this thing very, very seriously, as we can see from the teams that they have set. Let's have a look. We have, for China, the world number 3, Ding Liren. Yu Yangyi, the up-and-coming star who will play in his first super tournament in Norway Chess this year. Wei Yi, the prodigy, even though he is getting older, still, I believe the world's, don't quote me on this, the world's strongest player under 20? Not sure, could be close. And Bu Shangji, 2731 on board 4. For Russia, we have Sergei Karyakin, the former vice world champion. We have Jan Nepomniachtchi, 2771. And Alexander Grishuk, also 2771 on board 2 and 3. And the newcomer, Vladislav Artemyev, who just turned, I believe, 21 years old on board number 4 after his triumphant victory in the Gibraltar tournament. He deserved an invitation for the national team. I believe average ratings very, very close, 2758 versus 2759. So this match very likely would determine or would play a big role in who is going to win this World Team Championship, because China, very surprisingly, had already lost a match against the USA, so they were in a tougher spot than Russia. We'll go through all the games, and we will start with the one that was decided first. That is the game on board number 2 between Yu Yangyi with the black pieces and Jan Nepomniachtchi with white. Nepomniachtchi chooses 1e4, which is already a bit of a statement, because he's saying, I have an idea against your Petrov. Yu Yangyi, like many Chinese top players, is a Petrov specialist. And as I know from the World Championship and other occasions, this is a pretty tough opening to come up with something. So Jan Nepomniachtchi chooses 3d4, the alternative knight takes e5 here after d6, knight f3, knight e4, d4, d5. Many Chinese players have established this system with bishop to f5 as a very, very solid option. So maybe therefore Nepomniachtchi goes for the main alternative here, 3d4, knight e4, bishop d3, d5. So far all well known, knight takes e5, knight to d7, takes, bishop takes, castles, bishop d6. This line has been considered to be pretty fine for black for quite a while now, and we shall see what Nepomniachtchi has in mind. He goes for knight to c3, still mainstream theory, pawn takes, castles, and we see the white idea here is to play queen to h5, threatening queen h7 and the pawn on d5, provoking black into the somewhat weakening move f7 to f5. Still nothing new under the sun. Bishop g5 has been tried here, but after bishop queen to e8, black is fine. So Nepomniachtchi starts with rook to e1, and Yu Yangyi reacts by putting his pawn on c6. For theoreticians, queen to f6 could be an alternative here. But after c6, we quickly reach the critical position of this game. Bishop to g5, queen to c7, rook to e3, pawn to g6, queen to h4. Very logical play from both sides. Rook a8, rook e1 takes, and rook takes. Well, it looks like white still keeps a bit of pressure on these dark squares. c4 is looming. Black has to figure out what to do next. Here, Yu Yangyi, at least according to my computer, commits a very serious mistake. You can see the computer considers this position to be equal, and it recommends the very drastic measure to to just push pawn to b5 here, stopping c4 forever, thereby sort of incarcerating this light square bishop. Doesn't have that much to do, and saying I can withstand any assault on the dark squares. Pas de problème, like bishop e7, rook f7 for example. Takes, queen d8 check, queen f8. He's saying, without this bishop, you can't really hurt me. Yu Yangyi instead goes for the move rook to e8, and after that, it seems like the white pressure is already becoming extremely serious. Nepomniachtchi plays c3 to c4, now giving this bishop plenty to do, and even without rooks, this position turned out to be extremely hard to play for black. He went bishop to e8, white grabs more space with c5, keeping the second pawn push in reserve. After queen to e7, bishop to g5, well calculated move. Yu Yangyi was already in deep trouble. Maybe instead of queen e7, bishop f8 or something was more prudent, but the position remains very, very unpleasant for black because of the space that white grabbed on the queen side. Move like g3, hinting at bishop f4, bishop e5, one day g4 or c4 could be breaking through. It would have been a tough defense for Yu Yangyi either way. But in the game, turned out that his queen on e1 is not all that active, but instead allowed the white queen inroads into the position, so now it had to go back all the way to a5. Nepomniachtchi continues building the pressure here after queen to f6. It looks like it's already game over. Bishop to e5 is coming with this threat. Bishop g7 is forced, but the queen penetrates from the d6 square. After some further maneuvers, Nepomniachtchi took a pawn and went on to convert it without ever running into turbulence. So that means Russia, let's have a look at the final position. Here we are. Took the lead in this match 1-0 by defeating the very, very solid Petrov. I'm not sure if it was an opening problem, as mentioned. The computer says even here after b5, not much is happening. But big point for Jan Nepomniachtchi there on board 2. Now let us jump to board number 1, the top clash, where Sergei Karjakin had to defend himself with the black pieces against Mr. Ding Liren, the world number 3. Karjakin, after his very narrow defeat in the World Championship match, his rating hasn't gone up, and he's been, as people say, very busy with some other activities, but of course he does remain one of the tougher players to beat out there. So let's see if Ding Liren could pose any questions. Game opens with the Catalan, and players follow. Mainstream theory, you could say till here. Here the most common move is rook to d1. But Ding, as he has been constantly showing us recently, does come with a rare idea up his sleeve. He goes cd, cd, rook to c1, bishop b7, and now he blitzes out the move bishop to c7, forcing this queen to a somewhat awkward square. On e8, queen c8 would not have been very good then. The white queen moves and the queen is facing the rook on c1. So queen to e8 and queen to b3, blitzed out by Ding Liren. Karjakin took a lot of time here and did not find how the computer, at the very least, wants to deal with this. I had a short look and the computer says the surprisingly narrow path is something like rook to c8, keeping an eye on this guy. White goes knight a3, preparing knight to b5, knight to e4, knight b5, and now some spectacular stuff, starting with knight dc5, a piece sacrifice. Takes, pawn takes. And even though he's a piece down, black is okay here. He's threatening, I guess, both a6 to remove the defender of this bishop and c4 to push the white queen into this pin after queen to a4, bishop c6. But of course, this is stuff that you don't really come up with over the board. The line continues with more weirdness here after c4, queen a4. You would have had to play bishop to c5. A quiet move being a piece down, and it seems like black is okay. Which, yeah, seems like this is very modern preparation by Ding Liren. He's asking his opponent to find some kind of counterintuitive moves in order to fight off his idea. And if he does, more power to him. But over the board, these things are very hard to do. Of course, the line I gave wasn't completely forced, but that seemed the route to equality. Instead, Karjakin goes for knight to b8, trying to put this knight on a better square. But Ding is not surprised and keeps up the pressure, a4, planning to push a5. And puts a lot of pressure on Mr. Karjakin's position. The game develops quite logically. And black seems to have solved all his problems, but he never really gets control of the c file. Here, rook c8, for example, or of course run into queen takes c8, winning material. So instead he played bishop d6, trying to cover this c7 square. They bring the knight back into action. But Ding, with his control of the c file, keeps serious pressure on the black position. However, Sergei Karjakin is not nicknamed the Ministry of Defense for nothing. He often gets into trouble in the early middle game, but there is no one better in defending unpleasant positions like this one. Let's see if he manages. Still struggling, this rook on c7, controlling both the open file and the 7th rank. Highly unpleasant. a6. g4, g5, h4. Ding tries to open a second front here, gh, king g2. Going after this guy. Karjakin, in a sense, he can't remain quiet and comes up with a very impressive, at least to me, defensive sequence. He goes b5, following the rule that very often the defender should try to exchange pawns. Ding decides to keep the tension with b3, ab, bishop b5 was, of course, a very serious option as well. But after rook a8, black gains some counterplay at the very least. So Ding goes b3, and Karjakin once again shows his defensive class by going e6 to e5, not waiting for white to play king h3 and penetrating, but opening position, d takes e5, d4, getting rid of pawns. And here after rook takes g4, king f3, rook g5. White is still better with his passed b pawn. But in the hands of Sergei Karjakin, this position turned out to be a reasonably straightforward draw. Might look easy if you see it, but I could not think of many players that would defend such a position against Ding Liren. Karjakin did, so the score, well, this is the final position where they agree a draw. So the score remains in Russia's favor, 1.5-half. Now let's get to the clash on the bottom board. Artemiev with the white pieces against Bu Shangji. And turns out that Artemiev was gonna struggle, even though he's white. After sort of typical quiet opening, Artemiev is not a big mainline opening player, still has reached this tremendous level already. And yeah, the players get a quiet position. Bu Shangji, very, very solid, equalizes without too much trouble. Artemiev accepts these double pawns in order to put some pressure on the black queen side, in particular the b7 pawn. But around here, it turns out that if anybody's better, it's black, and it seemed like white already had to take some pretty drastic measures to keep the game balanced. The computer says the only move to keep this position equal is pawn to e4, trying to distract this knight from defending the b7 pawn. After d takes e, d takes c, let's say rook to b6, rook to b3. White is not facing any danger. Instead, Artemiev continues to play quietly, solidly, with the move pawn to e3. But here, it turns out that black is very much in the driver's seat. After rook b6, I could imagine what white missed is that after rook cb3, which looks like the logical move, black has the very tricky move, rook to b4, and you cannot capture twice, since it's running into c5. picking up a piece. So white had to start defending, and after rook b3, king f8, his position became very unpleasant. Bu Shangji correctly went for the pawn grab, took this pawn on a4, his rook a little out of play, but can't be caught there. For the time being, keep this rook in mind, however, for the remainder of the game. In this position, Artemiev could not find anything better than a desperate sacrifice if you just weight your pawn down with a bad position. So he took on c6, and you can see from the computer bar dropping. Computer is not impressed with this sacrifice. He's saying black should have very, very good winning chances here. And the winning chances keep getting better after, some moves from both sides. You could suggest many alternatives here, but in general, in this position, black is a knight up for only a pawn, so he should be winning, even though it's still not easy technically, because there's not that many pawns left. And this rook on a4 is still somewhat clumsy. So let's get to the critical moment. Rook b7, good move. Rook b6, takes, knight f5, rook to b3. And here, Bu Shangji does the most logical thing in the world, bringing his king into the action with king to f6. But it turns out that the clear-cut way to keep what I would guess is a winning position was the very strange knight retreat, knight to h6, opting for the d4 square and making sure that white doesn't have time to, for example, bring his king over, because now after king d2, knight g4, king c3, the black knight just snacks on these pawns. Knight h6, a strange move to play in time trouble, so king f6, can't really blame Bu for that one. And after king d2, things all of a sudden not so easy anymore. King to g5, rook to c3, and we see the makings of a white plan. The king could come here, maybe after d4, embarrassing this rook. And now it was already tough. It seemed like there's nothing better for black than to admit, okay, this king g5 operation wasn't great. I will need this g4 square for the rook. But it's already unclear if black can still win this position. Instead, Bu played what he had in mind. He goes king to g4, trying to embarrass these pawns with the king. But king g4 does take the g4 square away from his rook, and it turns out that that's all the time white needed to hunt this rook down by playing king to c2. Here, if black played the logical king f3, would be met by d4. Say king takes f2, king b3. And if anybody's better here, all of a sudden it's white, since the rook is falling. Instead, Bu Shangji went for king to h3. The difference being that now after d4, he can take on d4, and e takes d4 is not a check as it would be with the king on f3. But still, this operation did regain the piece for white. And now with equal material and such strong players, the game, not very surprisingly, ended peacefully, because they calculated that this race will not find a winner. Both guys get a new queen. And the game ends in a draw. Lucky escape there for Artemiev. But Russia does keep their lead 2-1. And now it was up to the veteran, Alexander Grischuk, to bring home the bacon in the last remaining game, where he faced Wei Yi, Juanito, as our Spanish friends call him, the super dangerous Chinese number 3 with the black pieces. However, Grischuk, obviously, no pushover, and he came armed for this game. In a line of the Gioco Piano, the Italian game, not the most popular line, but a line that has been played after bishop a7, a4, g5, bishop g3. In this position, where typically in the past black has castled here, Grischuk comes up with a new and very, very interesting idea, which I haven't checked deeply yet, but from what I've seen superficially, I really like it. He plays the move knight to d7, which looks very, very strange. But this move does a couple of things. It reinforces the e5 pawn, so that after d4, black is not obliged to take, but can now put the queen on f6 and maintain this barrier. Against the bishop on g3, he also prepares to maneuver this knight around even further with knight to f8, maybe followed by knight to g6. And by playing knight d7, the queen from d8 now covers the g5 pawn, which makes it possible for black to launch a very, very quick attack by pushing his h-pawn. First sight, I think my computer gave this move b4 and was arguing that white was better. But if you go a bit deeper here, after this very nice move, knight to f8, opting for g6 and preparing h5, the computer starts to realize that if anybody's in trouble here, it is actually white, not black. So a very deep idea by Alexander Grischuk, this knight to d7 move, which, yeah, I was impressed with. People keep coming up with new plans in this Jocko piano. No, it's been played a lot. Anyway, Wei Yi reacts with king h1, and Grischuk decides to shuffle his other knight around as well. Knight e7, knight g6. You could also make a case for this plan, which I mentioned, knight f8 immediately. Like Grischuk, very educational, decides to bring his other knight to a better square and leave this knight on d7, keeping this e5 pawn alive. So then there follows a lengthy face-off. Yeah, not really maneuvering, but shadow boxing. Grischuk goes for d5 for some simplifications. Wei Yi shuffles his knights around, finally develops his pieces, as does black. The position remains equal through most of this, and here Wei Yi starts drifting a little bit. It's nothing too serious. He plays queen e1 after c6. It seemed like rook to e1 was a somewhat better move, but he wanted to keep his bishop on f2 covered. So the position continues being balanced. And one key moment here, after knight takes d5, Grischuk goes for the Zwischenzug, knight to d3, queen to b6, and plays a move that I was surprised by when I clicked through the game. He goes for c takes d5. I thought queen takes d5 looked natural, but you do not want to allow this knight to jump into the action. Knight e4, giving a check here. Position might still be equal after king g7, but instructive decision to go c d5, just restricting the horsey, even though it's accepting some pawn weaknesses and offering some pawns for white to take. That turns out none of those are very tasty. Instead, Wei Yi goes after this guy, plays queen b5, rook e3, knight b3, knight takes b2, and here Wei Yi commits a mistake. The game would have remained very unclear if he had played knight to d4, opting for the f5 square, when white is a pawn down, but this very active knight. As we learned from Garry Kasparov, a knight on f5 is usually worth a pawn, and this rule does apply here. Let's say knight c4, knight f5, rook e6, rook a1. And the position probably remains around balanced, but this was the way for white to continue the game, because Wei Yi get concerned here about being a pawn down and played the natural. Knight takes a5, regaining the pawn, but after that only black can be better, because of the rook a5, queen b2, queen c7. Turns out these pawns are much harder to defend than the black pawns, and the rest was suffering for Mr. Wei Yi. He managed to escape, you could say, into this rook endgame, where black is a pawn up and has probably good winning chances. I don't know the objective evaluation. I would guess it's closer to a black victory than to a draw with the two rooks. But the good news for Grischuk was, of course, that his team was leading 2-1, and therefore, after Artemiev survived, Grischuk did not have to push all that hard. So he, well, not allows, I'm sure he tried to win, but Wei Yi manages to save this game. The bad news for China, however, is that saving this game does not save the match. And Russia goes on to win this match with 2.5, 1.5 in the final position here. You could, if you wanted to, take on d2. And these pawns are active enough to make a draw. So, big victory for the Russian squad in this match against, well, at least on paper, their strongest rivals in the World Team Championship, which means that Russia, who has won all their matches, are now leading the event with 6 points, while China, after back-to-back defeats against the USA and against Russia, on 2 points should no longer have a realistic chance to win the whole thing, which I'm sure will be disappointment to the Chinese squad. And it looks like Russia, who famously have not won the Olympiad in quite a while, will at the very least have excellent chances to win another prestigious team event, the World Team Championship. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope we all learned something. If not, I can recommend you to watch another video on Chess24. If you are watching this shortly after it's published, you might still be in time to catch none other than Mr. World Champion Magnus Carlsen, who will play against Chess24 premium users, but the show is free for everyone to watch on Friday, March 8th, 6 p.m. Central European Time. So yeah, you can watch the World Team Championship round number 4 before that, and then watch a little Magnus. What's not to like? Thanks for watching this video. See you in the next one.